Hello there, people of the internet. So I was just looking at some gunsmith nonsense that I had going on in the background, and I was looking at it, and I was like, God, that's so stupid. Why would I do that? And I was like, well, I did that because it works. And I'm like, well, if it's stupid but works, I guess it ain't stupid. And I discovered that that is the perfect name for a business. We'll call it Buttworks. And the slogan is, if it's stupid, Buttworks. Oh, that's so clever. Oh my god. So, hello there, people of the internet. I got some stuff in a little while ago, and I figured I'd go ahead and throw up some videos of me checking this stuff out. So I won some auctions, got in some inventory, and well, here we are looking at it. So this, what we're looking at today, this is called a chunk rifle, and it's a big, beefy boy. So I'm going to move that camera back just a little bit. This right here is a chunk rifle. It is a single-shot muzzle-loading rifle, and there's some interesting history behind these. Normally, whenever people think of your early muzzleloaders, they think of like a military style of muzzleloader, typically a smoothbore, but there were rifled muskets that came about that were in active military service here in the United States. But they think of not all that accurate rifles. They were accurate enough for like large groups of men to volley fire at other large groups of men and make enough shots on target to be able to win a battle. Well, much like today, how if you're watching this, I'm sure you're a gun guy. Much like today, how some of us enjoy going out and shooting things accurately. I know I enjoy, say, clacking steel at 300 yards because it's a good time. There were people that enjoyed that back in the day too. Just because they were muzzleloaders and muskets doesn't mean that there weren't firearms enthusiasts way back in the day. And although I don't know what the sport actually is, in the early 1800s, we're just going to call it chunk shooting because this is a chunk gun. C-H-U-N-K. And the concept was you more or less accurately shot your rifle just as accurately as possible from a static position. These chunk rifles, although I'm sure they were used in some sort of military context at some point in history, these chunk rifles are not intended for military service, and that is a very clear indication because of their weight and the way that they're set up. We'll get more into the actual setup of this rifle. But this is very clearly designed to be a super accurate muzzleloader. So unlike the military style of musket or muzzle-loading rifle that people normally think of whenever they think of the early to mid 1800s, there's a lot of differences with a more or less precision rifle from way back in the day. This is ye olde sniper rifle as far as I'm concerned. But these right here, back before cartridges were a normal thing, back before, well, back whenever muzzle loaders were kind of the go-to, these right here more or less were the precision rifle way back yonder. Now, unlike precision shooting nowadays, where you think of having like a full power rifle cartridge to be able to touch out to super long distances, these guys actually had a smaller, lighter weight, faster moving, most of the time lead round ball. Typically, instead of a 75 to 60 caliber round ball, these chunk guns used a typically 40 to 35 caliber round ball. They weren't made for shooting anything that was alive, although like I said, I'm sure they got pushed into some kind of service where that was the case. They were made for smacking targets at long distances from a static position. So these have super heavy barrels. Like, this is probably twice the weight of a military style muzzleloader, which is saying a lot because a military style muzzleloader is really heavy. You can see just how thick the barrel is on this particular rifle. And that was done because, well, as you shoot, your rifle heats up, and the more material that your barrel's made of, the slower it's going to heat up. as your barrel heats up, metal expands as it heats, and you lose accuracy, and so you just get more shots from your rifle if you have a nice heavy barrel. So that was probably one of the biggest mindsets as to why they had these nice heavy barrels. These are not infantry muskets. These are not designed for carrying on long marches to go fight an enemy force. These are designed for taking to competitions or out to the gun range and clinking whatever target it is that you're shooting at. They're designed for accuracy. They're not designed for fast reloads. They're not designed for the military lifestyle like we normally think about whenever it comes to muzzleloaders. So that nice, small, lightweight round ball that these things fired, since they were very small, very lightweight, they would be traveling super, super fast in comparison to like your larger caliber muzzle-loading projectiles. I have no idea what grain weight these things actually shoot, but I'm sure it's not much. And granted, you're not going to be sending this thing at smokeless powder territories, but you will be firing it faster than, say, a 75 caliber round ball from a military style muzzleloader. So these traveling faster, they have less of an arc. Granted, I'm sure it's still quite an impressive arc. They have less of an arc as they go into whatever target it is that you're shooting at. There are some definite benefits to shooting a smaller, faster projectile. The thing is, black powder just does not propel things all that effectively. So even though it's smaller and lighter weight, you're still probably not going to get that much more velocity. Not until you start looking at smokeless powder. So on top of the very large barrel and the extreme amount of weight, another surefire sign of this not being a military rifle is the fact that this has a wooden ramrod on it. Like, yeah, it's beautiful. This is a beautiful rifle, but that wooden ramrod is not going to be nearly as durable as, say, a metal ramrod that you would find on a military-style musket. So, this was a sport that was popular around, oh, I don't know, the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. Probably was popular after the United States Civil War. But since this sport was so popular, I can basically guarantee it, especially towards the end of the war where resources were really becoming difficult to source, I'm sure that a lot of these chunk rifles, even though they're not really set up for military service, I'm sure a lot of them saw military service. So one of the big contentions behind these rifles as to why they're not fit for military service, one, they're stupidly heavy. This son of a gun here probably weighs a good, oh god, I don't know. Judging by how it's hurting my legs sitting on it, I'd guess about 20 pounds, give or take. So it's super, super heavy, but it also doesn't have a half cock. So a half cock is like a safety notch, and that's important for a military style rifle whenever you're in the thick of things. But if you're just going to the range and you're going to be sitting in a static position and nobody's going to be shooting at you, then you don't need that half notch. It was one of those ways of attempting simplicity with a complicated system. If you notice, this rifle has two triggers. That's because it has a set trigger on it, which is, again, not something that you see all that often on military-style rifles because these are significantly more complicated than just making a regular old trigger. So there are some of these where you can cock it back and pull your front trigger, which is your firing trigger, and it'll actually go bang. This is not one of them. In this particular case, I have no choice but to set it by pulling the rear trigger, and that more or less makes this trigger, once I pull it, man, it's got maybe a half pound of force on it, and a really good trigger is a really good way to ensure that you get as much accuracy as possible. So that was a concept that was very popular back in the day. Light triggers are not a new concept. Just the idea of your trigger pull not being all that heavy means you're not going to move around that rifle all that much whenever you actually pull that trigger. So since this doesn't really have any safeties on it or about it, in order to make the gun as safe as possible versus just giving it a hair trigger, they went ahead and gave it a set trigger. This way, whenever you are ready to fire after cocking your rifle, you pull your back trigger and then you can pull your front trigger. So although it looks kind of like how, say, a double-barreled shotgun would look with two triggers on it like that, it really only has one trigger. The other one is just for, I guess, activating that particular trigger. So the stock on this rifle is absolutely beautiful. We got some gorgeous tiger striping. My God, this is a heavy gun. This is something that I would work out with for sure. Our butt plate and stock, just the style of stock on this rifle, is very indicative of, say, I don't want to call them sporter rifles, because sporter rifles means something completely different nowadays than it did back then. But this is definitely a non-military style of rifle, because the military style of rifles, they were far more simplistic in terms of the way that the stocks were cut. This right here is definitely a finer made style of rifle. I believe this particular one is a .40 caliber. I have not actually shot this particular one. If we look at our hammer back here, we can see that it was broken and welded back on at some point in its life. The nipple looks okay. I'm not sure what size it actually takes. This is a legitimate period chunk gun, so this thing is probably a good, I don't know, approaching 200 years old at this point. There's no real markings on it. I see some stuff right here. It looks like EA dot, I don't know, BEINHARD, but it's super worn. I can barely see that, so I'm not sure who that is or where that's at. I'm sure somebody in the comments below can tell me. And then on the actual lock plate, this right here is a really unusual style of lock plate as well. Normally with muzzle loaders, you see a style of lock plate that kind of sits where a receiver would sit on a modern style of rifle. It more or less is on the action itself. Versus this is a, I think it's called a back action style of lock plate, where all of the mechanisms are a little bit further back than they would normally be on a muzzle loader. But on our lock plate here, I see N, which I think is north, and it says M-E letter. I can't see them, they're just two wore out, and then I-O-R. So N, M, something, I-O-R. And then underneath that, I see W-A, maybe that's a P, maybe that's a capital R, I'm not sure. But that's all the information that I have on this particular rifle. So I know it's a chunk gun. I know it's probably from the early to mid 1800s. I know that there's a very good likelihood that it saw use in the Civil War, because like everything was being used in the Civil War. Like, people were absolutely desperate for firearms and resources, to the point where manufacturing was very shoddy, especially by the South in the Civil War. So very good likelihood that this right here was used in the Civil War. Very good likelihood that this right here would still be functional, and I could take it out and actually use it, and very good likelihood that I will do that. But that will be another day, another time. Very interesting little rifle. It's ye old precision rifle. This more or less is like almost like the sniper rifle of way back in the day, whenever muskets and muzzle loaders were a normal thing. So thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below is a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off. Have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you on the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.